So Brian, I think you were here, was it a couple of weeks ago, and talked about deep listening and really presence and just that beautiful practice of, in today's rush around world, being present for each other. And I wanted to talk kind of about a related topic today because it seems like in election years it comes up more in our minds, and that's right speech. The Buddha gave these teachings 2,600 years ago in response to questions from students about how do I speak in a way that aligns with my aspirations. My aspirations to have harmony, not just out in the whole world. We have a lot of polarization, a lot of things happening in society, but just even at home, with my partner, my roommates, with people at work. So this topic of how do we practice, sometimes we call it right speech or we call it skillful speech. What were the Buddhist teachings on how to practice that are so important, and they've been so important in my practice as one who kind of said whatever came up in her mind many years ago. Sometimes, in a way that, we think we're clever, but it wasn't very kind, and sometimes wasn't appropriate, and sometimes I was irritated when I said things, and sometimes I exaggerated. And I still do a little bit of each one of those, but not so much anymore. And what's really helped me have been the Buddhist teachings. So I want to share those today. They're practical because they've created so much more harmony in my relationships with my loved ones, my family, at work, and all those situations where you're thinking, is this helpful? Do I say it? Or sometimes we don't think at all, we just say it. They're really practical guidelines. And then at another level, these teachings on right speech, it's very much a practice. In Buddhism, we're looking at how we move from being all about me to being all about us. So most people, because we don't know better, we live from a place of self, from ego, protect this one, make this one stronger. And so our speech is oftentimes, we don't realize, really oriented towards me or self. With right speech, it's a practice of seeing everyone as one body and wanting to speak in a way that supports the whole body, brings harmony, is kind. And so it's very much a practice of living from seeing the whole, seeing relationships, not just seeing myself. But it's also, I found, a good measure to look at your progress on the path, to just stop and look at your speech, to see, this is the manifestation, my speech, of what's happening in my mind. So it's just a really, really good practice. And again, I think I've given a talk on this a number of times over the years. I've taught a workshop on it. And when I went back and looked at my notes from my prior talks, they all were kind of close to election dates. So I realized something gets triggered here, I think. And what happened this time was actually, I think it was late June, so I'm up in North Carolina with my mother, who loves to watch news all the time, and my sister, and things were happening with the Supreme Court and with this candidate and that candidate. And honestly, like the TV was going, I hardly ever watch TV, the TV is going full time, and then everybody has an opinion, and my family, and they're talking about it, and they're angry. And after a couple of days, it felt toxic to me. I started feeling heavy. And I don't feel like that very often, but I realized, wow, all of this speech that was so negative was really getting to me. So I thought, good time for me to come back and review these teachings, and maybe some of you it'll be helpful for as well. In the Buddhist teachings, he taught so many things. And the main thing he taught was, how do we free ourselves from suffering that we create through the actions of our body, speech, and mind, so that we can be happy, we can be free. And a lot of his teachings center on the mind. He said the mind is king, whatever's in the mind, that's driving the actions of our speech and our body. But he said, in the meantime, while we're learning about the mind and practicing and meditating, we need to at least stop causing harm with our actions of speech and body. And so he formulated these 5 precepts, for lay people in particular, to say, follow these 5, and at least you'll stop creating harm with your speech and your actions of body. And so the fourth of these precepts was very simple: abstain from false speech. And we'll unpack that this morning. The other precepts are wonderful too. We practice them all here. And in Thich Nhat Hanh, in fact, whose tradition we follow here, took those 5 precepts and called them the 5 mindfulness trainings. And in them, in his sort of reformulation, he gives us more commentary. He kind of brings them up to date, looks at our lives and how we need to bring these into our lives. So I wanted to just share Thich Nhat Hanh, abstain from false speech. In his mindfulness trainings, he calls it loving speech and deep listening. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening in order to relieve suffering and to promote reconciliation and peace in myself and among other people, ethnic and religious groups, and nations. And we certainly need that right now, don't we? Promoting reconciliation and peace in this world. Knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, and each one of us can ask ourselves that question with our speech: are my words creating happiness or suffering? I'm committed to speaking truthfully using words that inspire confidence, joy, and hope. When anger is manifesting in me, I am determined not to speak. I will practice mindful breathing and walking in order to recognize and look deeply into my anger. I know that the roots of anger can be found in my wrong perceptions and lack of understanding of the suffering in myself and other people. And so, he's giving us advice, and he's often got to focus on recognizing our anger, that so often our reactivity in life that's unskillful is due to this agitation, this anger that we're feeling. So there are lots of teachings from the Buddha on, okay, so what are the elements? How do I practice right speech? And the one that's really resonated with me was, again, 2,600 years ago, he is asked by a fellow named Cunda, who's a silversmith, how do I practice right speech? What are the principles here? And so the Buddha gave him 4 principles that we'll talk about that for me are really easy to remember, and I've given him a little acronym. Those of you who've been involved in this before are familiar with my acronym that we'll use. But I have found that those 4 principles, no matter who I'm talking to, they always apply. And they also apply when we talk to ourselves. So we don't pay attention oftentimes, but we walk around all day with this voice in our head going, blah, 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 blah. You can't do this. You're not good enough. You're better than, whatever it happens to be saying. We have a voice that, is it a voice that's bringing us joy and happiness, or are we kind of indulging in self-talk that's negative and creating suffering? So in all these teachings, please remember you might have somebody in mind as we talk about some of them, like, oh yeah, I could use this with this person, but don't forget that we talk to ourselves, and we really want to be looking at our thoughts and how we talk to ourselves. So the foundation for practicing these 4 is mindfulness. So why do we come in here and meditate? And again, there are so many books on meditation. People go into higher states. That wasn't really the Buddha's teaching, to go into some other state. It's to live in this world with clarity, with compassion, with wisdom. So all we're trying to do this morning with our meditation is just quiet the mind so the bouncy balls can settle down, and we can go through the day being present to our aspiration to speak in a way that's skillful with others. And we can also see our own reactivity. If the mind's just full all the time, if we're constantly thinking, even if we think, nothing wrong with these thoughts, I'm just planning or doing whatever. No, it's like a messy room. And we don't see if there's a little irritation or something coming up, and then we're in a conversation and we sort of just kind of, maybe say something unskillful because the mind isn't clear, the mind isn't quiet. So mindfulness is a foundation for skillful speech. And so, because I'm kind of visual, it's helpful for me to have a flip chart. Can't help myself. So the formulation I came up with a number of years ago in really looking at the Buddha's teaching, the 4 things that he taught for mindful speech, I call it HART, H-A-R-T. I'm a bad speller, but I realize that's not how you spell heart, but it fits with the fits with the steps. But basically, we want to speak we want to speak honestly, with affection, at the right time and place, and to benefit all. And that is a practice that is inclusive of other people, right? You know, we want to take people in. We want to include everybody, you know, in our affection and our honesty and being appropriate. Is this the right time? And we want to benefit them, not just ourselves with our talk. The other stance that we may see coming up from time to time would be to just talk from ego. And when we talk from ego, sometimes and we'll talk about honesty, that's an interesting, sometimes our speech is a little bit slanted one way or the other. Oftentimes, we may be speaking in a situation where there's a little aggravation. It may be just a little bit under the surface, or we may be angry, or something else is going on, but the mind's not peaceful and affectionate. Sometimes we speak inappropriately. It's just not the right time and place to have a conversation, because this person isn't even listening to me right now. They're upset, or they're caught up in something, you know, it's just inappropriate. And with the ego, oftentimes the benefit, it's all about me, you know. It's not about us. Sometimes we forget about the other person. So we're going to go through these stages of heart. And then the last thing we'll talk about is this I got from San Francisco Zen Center. I thought it was great. Wait, why am I talking? It's a question we can always ask ourselves, like when we're ready to open our mouth, like, why am I talking? So we'll start with speaking honestly. And I don't know, does anybody in here think that maybe sometimes they don't speak honestly? Anyone? Maybe just a few, but most people feel pretty honest, yeah. So what does that really mean, to speak honestly? And this I found interesting to really reflect on, because I feel like I'm super honest. My dad was really honest, and yeah, you know, we never tell lies in our family, but it's really nuanced. And there's subtle ways that we may not see where we're not being totally honest, and we may be creating harm or not being helpful in a situation. So one of these is we can be dishonest through omission. Maybe we're not speaking a truth that's difficult that might be helpful to be speaking. And it's interesting, I notice this a lot here at the center. We have a very nice community. People have wonderful intentions, good hearts. But I notice one area of omission I notice a lot is a lot of people aren't comfortable giving feedback. And we have lots of ways that we work. Some of us give Dharma talks or teach, or we do things in the kitchen, or we're helping with the family program, lots of different things. And I notice that a lot of people are uncomfortable giving other people feedback. And that's an interesting one to look at in ourselves, because feedback, when it's given in a helpful way, can really help somebody. It helps them to grow. You know, if everybody kept telling the emperor that he had no clothes on, you know, where did that go? So, you know, when this talk is over today, Brian will send me an email, because he always does, and I'll send him one after his talks, and he'll say, Angie, I really appreciated your talk today. These were the things that you did that I thought were helpful. And if there was anything that you might be able to do differently, perhaps you could consider this, or I thought maybe this could have used a little bit of a different approach. And so that's really helpful. So it's not offered like, we don't have to offer criticism, but we can offer to help people. And I think our reticence to give feedback sometimes is we don't want to feel, we want them to like us. You know, we're kind of afraid maybe somebody won't appreciate us or like us if we give them feedback. So learning how to give feedback to somebody is a way of practicing skillful honesty that I think a lot of us can look at. what I see happen instead, and not so much here, but I see it in my extended family sometimes, rather than one person telling someone else, this is happening and it's not helpful. Can we talk about another way to do it? They'll come to another family member and gripe. So we get together and we gripe about other people. And Fred's wonderful. If somebody comes to him, and says, well, and they're doing a little bit of griping, it doesn't happen a lot, but sometimes he'll say, have you talked to this person? Help them, talk to them directly. So I think this is an area that a lot of us could work on and look at honesty. It also means not exaggerating about ourselves or others. And, what does that mean? Telling our stories, maybe inflating our experiences a bit, trying to impress people, appear a different way. An interesting way to watch this one is like if you're at a dinner party or you're with some group and one person tells a story and then the next person jumps in and, we're jumping in with our story. And stories can bind, they can create, relationships, but to ask ourselves, do I need to tell this story right now? Why is it that I want to do this? And noticing if we're exaggerating our own behaviors and how we share. The other way we exaggerate, and I found myself doing this a few times in the past, we exaggerate other people's behaviors. Particularly if you get into it a bit with somebody, you always do blah, blah, blah. You never do such and such. We see people as one-dimensional and we put them in that category. And how does that work for you? Not too well, right? Yeah, so look at how we exaggerate behaviors. Another way that sometimes we think we're being honest, but we don't realize that we're acting on our perceptions of what we think is true, and our perceptions may not be true. So I have a perception, you could call it a truth if I'm not careful. I have a perception that you should always get to the airport really early because you never know what could happen on the way and you can miss your flight. And Fred teases like, well, we don't have to get there 14 hours early. and his perception is that, we don't want to waste time at the airport. Let's just go at the last minute, everything will be, he doesn't say at the last minute, but to me it feels like that. Everything will be fine. So, we don't realize how often, whether it's how we are with time, one partner's messy, the other person's a neat person. We think that our way is the truth. And we get into arguments and disputes because of our perceptions, but really none of that is true. So we just want to start to question, what is it we think is true that we get into? I'd also be careful of mind reading. So oftentimes we get into conversations with people and we think we know what they want. So recently I was planning with one of my sisters a trip for the fall, and we agreed we'd get back together soon on the phone so she could make her plane reservations. And so maybe a week later I get a text from her saying, I know you're too busy to make this trip. I realize there's so much on your schedule. I'm sure next year would be better for you. It's fine with me. And I called her. I'm like, no, I just haven't gotten to it yet. But she had a story in her mind, based on her own causes and conditions, that this was where I was coming from. And rather than asking me, and then I had to stop and ask her, well, what's going on with you? And not make an assumption about why was she bringing this up. And then it was all clear and we made our plans and it's all fine. But we want to stop in relationships and just consider, how often am I, rather than asking somebody, how are you feeling? How's this landing with you? How often we think we know. And we may act based on what we think we know. I think being truthful to ourselves is important also. It's easy sometimes to be in denial about maybe unwholesome behaviors. No, I don't drink too much, or yeah, I'm okay with this, or I'm not good enough, or they wouldn't want to be friends, or whatever we're telling ourselves. We're oftentimes telling ourselves things that are self-limiting or maybe covering over something that's challenging that we don't want to deal with. And so I'd invite you to just watch your thoughts and just notice, are there things you're telling yourself that may not be true? And ask yourself, is this true? You know, we've heard our thoughts so many times, we just think they're true. But oftentimes, we're boxing ourselves in, we're limiting our potential because we're not really questioning these beliefs that we have. So now that I've explained the nuances, how many people think they're ever maybe a little dishonest? A few more hands go up. Yeah. I'm going to stop and come back for questions in a few minutes. I realize this is kind of a lot. Even though there's just 4 things, it's kind of a lot for a Dharma talk, but I want to just touch on each one. Speaking with affection. I mean, if we did nothing other than just always be coming from a place of affection with our speech, that alone would radically transform our speech, our communications with other people. So speaking with heart means we're speaking from affection, from a place of goodwill, because sometimes some people you may think, well, it's hard to think about speaking affectionately in this particular situation, but you want to have a mind that wants wholesomeness, that doesn't want to harm somebody else. Sometimes we speak in ways that put people down, that maybe we feel hurt and we're kind of striking back a little bit. Those are times not to talk. One of the teachings in Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva is when you feel this aggravation coming up in you, be a log. And it's great advice. If you're in a conversation and you feel some aggravation, if at all possible, just don't talk immediately. And it doesn't mean that your mind is a log, but your body and speech can just stop. And in the mind, you can turn and look into the suffering that's coming up in you. Just be present to your own irritation, sadness, resentment, whatever is coming up in that moment. And if we're present to that in ourselves, and there's lots of tools and other teachings about how to take care of emotional difficulties, then when we feel affectionate, we can talk. If you're having a conversation with someone and it starts going in a difficult direction, you can pick it up later. When you're calm, you can have that discussion with someone. One way to come from this place of affection is to water those seeds in your mind. And so a lot of you know that once a month on the full moon, we have full moon loving kindness and compassion meditation here in the hall. And that's a great way to practice watering those seeds of loving kindness in your heart and mind. The more you focus on watering those seeds, of bringing that attitude of friendship, of wanting to help others, your mind is going to just naturally over time transform to this more beautiful garden, compassionate garden, and you will bring that into your encounters. But in the meantime, when it's not there and we're aggravated, be a log and just, don't speak. We want to speak with words that are nourishing, words that are kind. If we speak in anger to someone, what's that going to do? Put them on the defensive, hurt their feelings. Yeah, we all know that, right? If somebody speaks to us that way, we close off, right? Oftentimes. And so we know that it's not helpful to speak that way, and it also doesn't feel good for us. So the second of the teachings is speak honestly and then speak with affection. The third is speak at the right time and place. And so there are times when it is appropriate to say something honestly to somebody because they're causing harm. But is it the right time and place to speak to them? Are they open? Like we just said, if they're angry, they're not open to it right now. And if I'm angry, it's not the right time and place because my words won't be loving and friendly. If it's in front of other people, they might be embarrassed. Is this really necessary? So we just use our judgment. Oftentimes we have this difficult conversation that we need to have with someone. So I had a situation a couple of years ago with an extended family member who has a real problem with alcohol. And it was the elephant in the room. And everybody felt uneasy saying anything, even though this person was drinking constantly all day long, and the behavior was getting, you can just imagine it was unkind and it was uncomfortable, but nobody was comfortable saying anything. And so, speaking honestly, but at the right time, was finding a time when I wasn't irritated, because I was a lot watching this, to just come back and meditate that I love this person, I care for this person, I want to help them, I want to bring benefit to them. How can I do that? And so we have these times where they're difficult conversations, but if we can have them in a loving way, we can't control the outcome, but if we can if we can follow these 4 principles and have them in a loving way at the right time, we can start bringing perhaps some healing to that. And it happened, but it was hard, and sometimes this practice is challenging. Speaking to benefit all, the final one of these is, again, just noticing what is it that I'm talking about, and are my words helping me look better, making me feel more comfortable, or are they bringing benefit to the people that I'm with? And so am I talking about something that's meaningful to them? When Fred and I were first in a relationship many years ago, I was working at a job that was kind of stressful, like a lot of jobs, and I would come home, particularly after traveling, and just tell him all about everything. John had this presentation, we didn't get hired on this client, Mary's going to this division. And he finally said, but I care about you. How do you feel? How do you feel in these situations? What does it bring up in you? He didn't really care about John and Mary and all the things going on at work. And we don't realize sometimes that maybe we're letting off, I think for me it was letting off stress, coming home and just talking all about my day, but it wasn't of interest to my partner. And it's not that he wasn't interested, he just wanted to know about me as a person. He was quite a bit deeper than I was at that point. He wanted to know about, was I happy? Was I struggling? And so we learn over time that, we can use our words in a way that bring meaning to our encounters with people. Talk about things that are helpful to them, avoiding idle gossip and chatter. The Buddha talked about that a lot. How are my words bringing benefit to other people? So let's stop there and just recap. It's pretty simple, but there's a lot to practice when we get into this, and a lot of things we can look at to see, is my speech, mindful speech is very much about relationships, right? Is my speech creating loving, harmonious relationships? Where are opportunities that I could maybe do something differently, more skillfully? How does the Buddha's advice really apply for my life? So again, he taught we speak with honesty, but looking at it more deeply. We're not exaggerating, we're not leaving things out. Am I speaking with affection? And how do you know that? It's pretty easy to check in with yourself, right? At any moment. This is why mindfulness practice is so helpful. We learn to just stop and just notice, am I relaxed? Does my heart feel open right now? Or do I feel kind of defensive, a little bit agitated? And if so, these were like all four. The Buddha said you need to check off all four of them before you talk. So in any moment, you want to always be coming from that place of calmness and affection. Is it the right time? Is this an appropriate place to have this conversation? Is the other person even open to me right now? Would another time be better? Am I calm right now? And then again, to benefit all. What's the point of what I'm going to say? Is this really going to be, we think we know what's going to be helpful for someone else, but will this be helpful for them? And we want things to be helpful for us too, so I'm not saying we put ourselves out of the equation, but is it going to help all? So looking at those four together, please just close your eyes for a moment and just reflect. Reflect on your relationships with people that you're close to. And maybe, think about some of the difficult conversations that come up. Or it could be people at work. Where in your interactions do you get challenged? Do you see an opportunity to bring these practices in to maybe transform the conversation, the relationship with the other person? Just kind of run through sort of your typical day. Are there certain types of situations that are difficult? Where do you find yourself a little agitated? What's challenging for you? Where do you get caught? Asking ourselves, where do I get caught, and what do I see in looking at these four principles of heart that might help me to do this differently? So what do you notice? Let's share a bit about what comes up for you. Anybody in here, first of all, have any difficult conversations that they'd like to see transformed? Yeah? Yeah, most of us do. So what are some situations that come up for you that you see maybe you could do something differently? And just when you're ready to share, you can just raise your hand, bow in, and we'll take you the microphone. Yes, this woman back here. And we're using the microphone because we have people on Zoom so they can hear as well. And if you're on Zoom, if you want to just chat in, Dee Dee will relay that as well. Yes.
Hi, my name is Kathy.
Welcome, Kathy.
I have a lot of unskillful communication. I don't know if it's because of the way I was raised. Although I see that I'm a lot like my grandmother that raised me. I am now raising my two grandchildren, and it seems that I am always nagging at them. I want the best for them. It seems I'm worried a lot about technology, really. And I have a 15-year-old that's in high school, and she has the phone in her hand all the time. And, even though I've had so many conversations with her, it's like I'm constantly nagging at her. And I see that I really think I'm driving her away. And I'm thinking I'm trying to save her. I'm always saying something.
Yeah.
And I would really like to alter that conversation. with her, and the little one too. She's 10. And, you know, I see myself in them, that they snap, you know. And I noticed this in the past probably 6 months to a year about myself, that I almost feel kind of like an animal, you know, like when something's bothering me inside, I feel like, you know, like that. Yeah. And I'm constantly, I maybe should always be quiet. And I have really started so much. I'm so much better than I was, really. Honest, Your Honor, I'm so much better than I was. That I'm actually quiet a lot of the times and don't speak. But when I do speak, there is that underlying, you know. Yeah. And my grandma was from Eastern Europe, and she was from Czechoslovakia, and she was very poor, actually. And, you know, the priest would slap them across the face if they said the wrong thing, but really that's kind of how she talked to me. And I've been walking around, because she would say to me when I was very little, she goes, "Someday God will punish you." And I'm like thinking, "Bubby, you are right. I am being punished now because I cannot get a grip on myself." So I guess that's all I have to say for now.
Thank you, Kathy. You know, you brought up so much that's really important in our practice. And first, let me say the fact that you are noticing it and stopping, I mean, that's huge. Most people just, you know, we're on autopilot. And yet, are we ever kind of pay back to our parents, you know? I mean, you think about how your family spoke and communicated, and then you see it in yourself. I mean, that's where we learned. In Buddhism, we call it causes and conditions. So what makes us the way we are in this moment is all the experiences we've had in the past. So it's your grandmother and your parents, and, you know, this is how they talk. Some households, when they're angry, nobody says anything. They just stuff it. Other households, it's the other direction, and people say whatever. And, so to begin to see that and to realize, wow, I could do it a different way, and it's probably not going to change overnight. And we do feel like nags sometimes. And sometimes we realize, wow, my nagging isn't helping. Maybe there's a different way to do it. You know, we have so many more challenges with children. I mean, I've only talked about pretty much oral communication this morning, but obviously social media is huge. You know, I think it'd just be interesting as your grandchildren get older to bring them into the conversation, because you can tell somebody something over and over and over again, and after a while, they're just not hearing us, right? But do they consider, you know, is there anything they feel that they see that's causing them suffering with this? Do they see any other way to do it, to just engage in that conversation? But to continue to come back to understanding that there are causes and conditions that have brought them to where they are right now, so we're not impatient with them. You know, that's a big part of it. It's that affection piece that's huge here. You know, we can know what it is. We can have a pretty good idea of what might be helpful for them, but if we say it with aggravation, they hear it and then we suffer. And so the way to take care of anger taught by Thich Nhat Hanh is through understanding. And he says understanding is love. And so we sit down and we look at the people in our lives, and we look at all the factors that have created them, our children, our grandchildren, their peer pressure, the social media, you know, all the things that are affecting them. And we accept them, that this is who they are right now. And we love them the way they are, and yet we're still parental figures in their lives, and it is important to give them guidance while we can. So it's not abdicating responsibility at all. I'm not suggesting that, but really working on that piece with affection and trying to see if you can maybe find a playful way to engage them, if there's some other way that you might be able to engage them. And I mean, it's challenging. Everybody's facing this with just trying to pull them away from social media. I know. But it sounds like your practice is moving in the right direction. You've got much more self-awareness. And just continue to work with that, I'd say. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. There's someone else that has difficulty. There's a gentleman in the back, and then we'll come forward to Angela.
Hi. This is it's more of a general question. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay. You mentioned this before, but when we're talking about the right time and place to share something, and this is somewhat related to the last question, but there's a discernment, I guess, that happens as to whether the person is open to receiving something. And I guess my question is just how, do you have any thoughts on, how to develop that discernment and to realize when someone's open to receiving input? Because I know if they're not open to it, they can actually close off more if you try to give
Absolutely.
Some kind of advice. So
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you had any more thoughts on that, I guess.
Yes. So for me, I had a situation recently where I felt like something was happening unskillful in a small group of people with someone's communication, and I was feeling kind of dismissed, in the conversation. And I realized that wasn't the appropriate time because I wasn't feeling calm. I was feeling kind of hurt. And also realized that in that three-way situation, it wasn't the right time and place. And then I thought the other person's energy might also not be the right time and place. And so, later on, probably the next day, I made contact with a person and said, I have something that came up for me in a conversation that we had recently, and it's been bothering me a little bit. I'd like to discuss it with you if that's okay. So I asked permission, and I brought it up, and you learn a lot of this in nonviolent communication classes, which I'm no expert in, but I didn't go in making it about the other person. I sort of brought forth how I felt, and also remembered that my perceptions, this other person's perception of the situation might be very different than what my perception was. My perception was I was being interrupted and not really heard in that situation. So I just brought it up that when this happened, I try to be as factual as possible. When I observed this happening, the way I interpreted it is I felt kind of hurt. And so I took responsibility for my own feelings, which I think is important, instead of pointing at the other person and just saying, what was your perception, and do you think we could talk about a way to maybe do that differently in the future? And it was a wonderful conversation. The person was very open because I didn't put them on the defensive. I took responsibility. I waited to a time when I felt like, there was really nothing going on, things were calm. And what in the past might have gotten into a real bit of a snit, it wasn't like that at all. It was very open, and the person said, I can see how that would happen that way. Sorry about that. And then it was just a very different experience because the emotionality wasn't there and we weren't triggering each other. Is that
Yes.
helpful?
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Angela had a question or comment?
Hi. I just wanted to thank you for this because you gave us this at MBSR, and I have been using it.
Uh-huh.
And yesterday was a very tough day, lease agreements, reorganization, a lot of hurt feelings, rent's being raised, what are we gonna do, that kind of thing. And I was able to sit for 2 hours and negotiate with this person, and then later on, and be able to really sit without me being reactive to everybody else's reactivity.
Yeah.
And it really made a difference with the entire group then, because everybody felt heard, understood, and everybody has, like you said, there's all these causes and conditions, and everybody's different agendas. So it was really nice that everybody, came to a place where okay, this is not good for anybody really, but this is what was necessary, and we just have to pivot and make changes. And it was working with that. I really had to work with that.
Yeah.
So thank you for that tool.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. And it's really wonderful because, as Thich Nhat Hanh used to talk about, be the calm person on the boat. So it sounds like you were the calm person on the boat. These things can get very contentious, and when one person is mindful and stops and is open, I mean, that's an inspiration. That can show other people the way, and we really need that. I mean, in this society, I mean, we're talking about a lot of personal interactions, but there's just so much mean talk, and if you just read everything and listen, it can be disheartening. And I think we need to be the people with heart that are open. And there's a lot, I mean, we talk about affection and causes and conditions. Some of the things we're talking about, if you're new, those are whole bodies of teachings and practices that we do. But they're practices that teach us how to love the world the way it is, because there's a reason for everything that happens. Buddhism's very logical. There's a reason for everything that happens, and this is how we got here, and here we are. But can we create new causes and conditions? And when you look at life with that view, when we do the 4 thoughts, like at the beginning of meditation this morning, I just reflected on, this is a precious human birth. But the other ones are causes and conditions, impermanence, and just the unsatisfactoriness of thinking you can control things and find happiness. And when we practice as a community and we learn the Dharma, we learn these teachings, and then we understand, well, this is why people are the way they are. This is why the world is the way it is. And we accept them and we love them, because we realize, wow, if I was in their shoes, I'd see it this way too. If I was the landlord or whoever's in that situation, everybody's looking at it based on their own causes and conditions. And so that doesn't mean we don't then try to introduce something new to move us all forward in a positive way, or that we're a doormat. But we don't have to go through life being angry and having angry conversations. We can always come with love and understanding. So thank you, Angela. Yes, Vivian. In the back there. Oh, and then we'll go online. Sorry about that.
How can we communicate with affection when where you have to say is something that is bothering you a lot?
Well, maybe I'll just give you an example to continue the one I started before. So when I had the situation where the person, this was my home, was just drinking from sunup to sundown, and saying things that were hurtful to people. It felt toxic to me because I'm not used to being in a home with that type of behavior going on. And so nobody else was saying anything. The person's wife wasn't saying anything. The other person with us wasn't saying anything. It was bothering them. Everybody was on edge. And I felt like it was appropriate for me to say something. And so I do my heart. I practice that too. It's really helpful. So I thought, first of all, I sat and I meditated on, I love this person. It's part of my family. I thought about their causes and conditions. I had something very difficult to say, which is, you have to stop. You cannot have another drink in my house. And this is hurting people, and it's hurting you, and I love you, and I hate to see this happening. And I can't control your life, but at my house, I want to support wholesomeness and well-being. But I started with, I had to come back. It's always so helpful in relationship to come back to, what's my aspiration for this relationship? Because we can get caught up in the drama of whatever's going on, and to remember that I want harmony, I want well-being with this person, and I really wanted this person, I want them to be healthy. So I waited, and again I said, I'd like to talk. We sat down when no one else was around, and I talked about this person's well-being and also the well-being of the group that we had there, and said, this is just really difficult, but sometimes we just have to put our foot down and say, this is how it's going to be. And it was well received. I don't know that I changed any behavior outside of my house, but with children, sometimes with employees, sometimes people cross lines, and we have to tell them, give them a difficult message. But I think if we can give a difficult message to someone, even if it means they're not going to be employed anymore, it's an employee, and I've had to give those messages before too. Again, it's to always do it from a place of care for the person, of goodwill. If nothing else, I would really focus on that and the heart. And then we do what needs to be done, but we look at our speech, can we be kind and caring? No. Time for just a couple online.
Okay, one is you've probably already answered how to be open to advice and not to get defensive. And the second one is how to speak to benefit all and to help the other person understand that other people are suffering, such as if they can only empathize with one side in a war.
Yeah. The second one is tough because it's complicated, right? I mean, people are suffering on both sides of most conflicts. And so I don't feel like it's my job to change somebody's mind, but, can I just bring some openness and compassion to both sides into a situation and respect that people will take steps where they see their suffering and respect their right to do that. And I respect people's right to vote differently than me, to see things differently. Again, I don't know everything. I'm probably a low information voter, as they call them. I don't know everything about all the issues. I don't know a lot about most of the issues. And so, we still have to vote. We still have to be citizens. But to just always address life with a bit of an I don't know mind. I could be wrong. My mind has changed. But, right now, if I see suffering in the world, I try to reach out and help, but also not be exclusively looking at one side and not seeing the suffering somewhere else. The first question, I'm an expert on that one, though, and that's not being defensive with criticism. So I used to be really defensive with criticism because I had a father who was very critical. And, I didn't want to get punished. I didn't want to be on restriction, I just had all my defenses and my guards up. And I realized as an adult that I was bringing that into my relationships, Fred would try to tell me something totally benign, and I would find myself sort of closing off, like I don't want to be criticized, and I could feel that reactivity coming up, so I made that a practice to sit on the cushion and imagine those specific types of situations that brought up my reactivity, and the first step was what I called the duct tape step, and that is just to be a log. In those moments where I'm feeling defensive and he's saying something, which in hindsight was only helpful, but this conditioned mind with its filters of defensiveness and I'm not good enough and someone's saying something and immediately, I had to work through those causes and conditions to transform them. So had to, first of all, just no matter how I felt inside, be a log. Don't say anything. Even though I could feel my skin was hot, I wanted to say something. Like our grandson used to say, want to hit my sister, wanted to say something, but didn't. And then, continuing to work with that. And then I would find that earlier and earlier, I'd recognize the signs that agitation was starting to arise, that old defensiveness was starting to come up, and seeing it, and having gone through and explored all this, you have to unpack these things sometimes to realize this is not a statement about me not being good enough. This is just somebody telling their feedback based on a situation, not making it about us, not making it personal, and just being open and being curious. So it's a process that takes time, but to sit down, look at it deeply, investigate the causes, investigate your core beliefs, and then be very mindful about what's happening in your head, in your mind, and in your body when you start to feel criticized, so that earlier and earlier you stop that reactivity, because you've already unpacked it at this point, right? You've looked at it, you realize, maybe they're right, maybe they're not, but why can't I be curious and just see? Maybe this is an opportunity to do something different. So, I would say work with those types of things that come up. It's very, very gratifying to see that change. And it feels really good. And, I have little reactivity, but not too much anymore. And it's true with all of us. It's practice. Everything we teach here, it's all about practice. So you can hear lots of words, blah, blah, blah. I know I've been just talking for the last hour, but it's practice. Like Angela said, you got to practice hard. You got to bring it into your life. It's not just because you heard it, it's not going to make a difference if you don't practice. So I think with that, we are at time. Thank you very much.